So, hello everybody, and welcome to this episode of CFO 4.0. With me today is David B. Horne, founder of Add Then Multiply and Funding Focus. So, welcome, David. So great to have you on the show.
It's lovely to be here. Thank you very much.
So, you've actually had quite an interesting career history, a lot of it in a CFO role yourself. So, tell us a little bit about some
Yeah.
of the different organizations and types of roles that you've been in over the last sort of 10 years.
Okay. Well, I mean, I've been a CFO of companies for more than 20 years now. So between 2000 and 2010, I was the CFO of three very different companies. These were full-time roles. One was a PR agency. One was an AIM-listed digital media and publishing group, and one was an AIM-listed auction business. And in those three companies, we did a lot of fundraising and M&A. So raising capital and going out and buying other companies and integrating them into the groups that I was working for. And then I left that world in 2010 and have been running my own business since then. So really concentrating on, also doing CFO work, but this time more fractional. And that's evolved and developed over the last 15 years. And now I've got a team of 5 people working with me. And we support entrepreneurial leaders in their businesses through two things, really. One, we run their finance teams for them. We become their finance teams for them. So like an outsourced finance function. And the other thing that we do with them is work on scale up strategies through raising capital and buying other companies.
So, what do you think some of the challenges are at the moment with raising capital?
Well, I mean, it's a difficult market right now, generally. Has been a challenging market for the last year or two, with a lot of geopolitical turmoil. I think in addition to that, there are some very specific challenges, and that's where my social enterprise funding focus comes in, because we're very much focused on trying to make access to fairer funding, because right now, if you're a woman or if you're a man from a non-white background, it's very, very difficult to raise capital. I mean, the statistics are appalling. In the UK and Europe, they've got data traced back till 2008, and only in two of those years, in 2008 and 2010, was more than 2% of all venture capital funding put into companies with all female founding teams. And it was like 2.4 one year and 2.2. It's never been above 2% since then. And in the USA, it's never been above 3%.
Wow. And and is that because there's not enough applicants, or is there a problem with the process and assessment of those founders?
There are plenty of applicants because, again, the same statistics that I was referring to show the number of pitch decks submitted by the various gender makeup teams. And all female teams are currently submitting somewhere between 6.5% and 7% of pitch decks, and yet they're getting less than 2% of the funding. And on the other side of the equation, all male teams are submitting in the low 70s of the percentages of the decks, and they're getting more than 80% of the funding. So it's a complex issue. I think it really boils down to three main subjects. Number one, inherent gender bias. Number two, there aren't enough women in the venture capital industry. And number three, women tend to be much more conservative in their forecasts. And the whole venture capital game is all around, how do we find the next unicorn? And a lot of female founders are not looking to create the next unicorn. And so they're almost, they're less interesting to the venture capital industry. And, I mean, we could go into that in a lot of detail if you want, but conscious of time.
And that's interesting in terms of it's not just obviously females, but it's also non people from maybe different backgrounds as well. So
Yep.
tell us a little bit
Yep.
about, some of the challenges that they face. Do you think, because obviously it's not all about, if they're male or female. So what are some of the other challenges, I guess, or patterns of funding behavior that you're also seeing?
Well, I mean, the one of the main criticisms of the venture capital industry is that it's pale, male, and stale. And so, it's a bunch of old white men. Some of them aren't old, but yeah, and there have been some incredible statistics published that looked at things like here were the universities that the venture capitalists went to, and on this side of the Atlantic, it was Oxford, Cambridge, Imperial, those kind of unis, and in America it was Harvard, MIT, Yale, and then they looked at the universities that the founders of companies they invested in went to, and guess what? It was Oxford and Cambridge and Imperial and Harvard and MIT and Yale. So they're focusing on what they know because they perceive it to be less risky.
Mm.
Even though the whole nature of venture capital is very risky and very risk focused. But again, that's where the fixation on the unicorn comes in. Because if you think about it, if you're a venture capital firm and you've just raised $50 million or £50 million, whatever, and you're going to invest in 50 companies, £1 million each, and going into this game that of those 50 companies, 10 of them are going to go bust. And 35 of them are going to become what they call zombie companies, which, they just carry on, they just scrape through, but they don't really bring any returns. You're not going to put any more capital into them. And oftentimes they get sold on to restructuring people or sometimes sold back to the founders. And then there's 5 companies left, and one or two of them might return 1 or 2 times what was invested, and 1 or 2 of them might return 5 times what was invested. But hope that one of them becomes a unicorn, and that unicorn, when it exits, returns the entire 50 million of capital plus all the returns, plus covers all of the expenses, and that's what makes the venture capital industry go round, as it were. The more honest venture capitalists admit that they are sophisticated gamblers, but they are always focusing, how do I find a unicorn company? And a unicorn, in case any of your listeners don't know, is a company that has a valuation of $1 billion or more. So for a lot of female founders that I talk to, they are typically much more conservative. And they might say, well, look, I want to grow my company to a 50 or 100 million valuation, which is still great. It's still a successful business, but it's not got the potential to be that unicorn. And because venture capitalists are hunting for unicorns, they just don't get a look in.
And so a lot of this is predicated on the fact that VCs are looking for that sort of, like you say, that massive valuation at the end of the period.
Yeah.
Is there alternative options for those that perhaps have more conservative growth plans that get them to get them to a destination, but perhaps not via the VC
Get
route?
them to it. Exactly. Yeah, yes, there are, and the main ones that are really around in the market now, and one of the ones that's probably the most female friendly, based on the research I've done, is actually crowdfunding. And when I was researching my book, Funded Female Founders, one of the things I looked at was a study that they did in Australia that was looking at the crowdfunding industry there, and they found that something like 40% of the companies that were successfully funded were led by women. So crowdfunding is definitely a route to go down. Angel investing is also a good route to go down. And for your listeners that are in the UK, the UK BAA, or the UK Business Angels Association, is doing a great deal of work to try and promote both women as angel investors and also angel members investing in female-led businesses, because they recognize that there's a huge disparity in the marketplace, and there is evidence from numerous sources that demonstrate that female-led businesses generate better returns, and yet the men still in the VC world still focus on investing in male-led businesses because they perceive them to be less risk and having the greater opportunity to become a unicorn. And finally, there's family offices, and in fact, one of the female founders that I feature in that book is a woman who runs an incredible business in Switzerland. She's a scientist by training, and became an entrepreneur, and she is developing a personalized skin tissue therapy for people who have burns. So rather than taking a graft off a bit of unburnt section of your body if you've got really bad burns, they actually make a personalized skin that can be used and used to repair and replace the damaged skin. And she's raised over 50 million, and she bypassed the venture capital industry and went straight to family offices. So there are definitely routes to go down. And, I think in terms of the venture capital industry, there is some pressure on it to change, but they're doing so well anyway that sadly, change is going to come slowly.
And when you're working with founders around raising capital, when would you recommend? Because obviously you mentioned a couple of different options there. When would you recommend those different options that you talked about?
Well, I mean, crowdfunding and angel investment tend to be the earlier stages, so they tend to be smaller amounts of money.
Mm.
Um, and again, thinking on the UK side of things, typically smaller amounts of money. If you've got listeners in the United States, as with everything there, there's much deeper pools of capital available. But if we focus on the UK, you can raise crowdfunding and angel investment in the kind of, I mean, up to 500,000 if you're really successful, maybe a million. There are a few crowdfunding businesses that have raised significantly more. They've tended to be well-known B2C brands. There have been breweries, there have been challenger banks that have raised many millions through crowdfunding. But for most businesses, if anybody goes onto one of the main crowdfunding sites, they're typically raising somewhere in the range of 200 to 500, maybe six, 700,000. So that's often a good first route to go in. Angels are also very useful. Angels, in case anyone isn't clear, angels are wealthy individuals who are investing their own money. And they often are entrepreneurs who've had a successful exit, decided that they didn't want to run another business, but they wanted to do something that gave back. And so they're investing in early stage founders. So those are both earlier stage. Family offices tend to be a little bit later stage. So, for instance, this lady in Switzerland that I was referring to, she had already raised a couple of million through angel investors before she went out to the family offices, where she's raised. I think she's now on something north of 50 million that she's raised. But of course, being a scientific business, she's got huge R&D costs.
No, absolutely. And in terms of, what do you think that people should think about before they go into a funding round? When you're working with entrepreneurs, do you see them as being well prepared for funding, or is that something that you kind of you end up coaching them through?
Very much the latter. Very much the latter. A lot of them don't really know how to put together a pitch deck. They don't know how to go after, researching the market, finding out who are the right people. And I mean, again, I'll plug the book. There's a whole chapter in this book that's all about how to actually prepare and to give yourself the best shot at successfully raising capital. And I set out, here's what a pitch deck needs to look like. I've seen pitch decks from some founders that are like 35 or 40 pages long. That's just overkill. Um, my recommendation of a pitch deck is 12 slides. It's all set out in the book. And it's really it's a case of, especially when it's your first presentation, it's really a case of getting the message across to the investor. Who are you? What is your company? What is the problem that you're solving? What does the market look like? What are the financial returns? And it's kind of one slide on each of those, plus a few other bits and pieces. But for early stage businesses, especially important is, who is the team? Because when it's still an idea, or something that's maybe got an MVP out there but isn't yet generating revenue, it's like, well, I can't assess this on the basis of what's going on in the business. So I've got to assess it on the basis of, who are the founding team? Are they good people? Can I rely on them? What's their experience like? Are they, do they gel well together as a team? Is there more than one person in the team, or is it just one person? And again, it's really important an investor's perspective to know that there's more than one person who's really driving the company. There might be one founder, but it's often a good idea to have a couple of other co-founders, or at the very least, some very senior people on the team to support the founder.
And we've talked a lot already on the podcast about sort of getting to funding, but what does a
Yeah.
successful scaling business actually look like? How do you get that growth, whether it's going for that 100 million or 200 million like we talked about, or the 1 billion unicorn? So, what are some of the things that those investors are looking for?
Well, as I said, in the very early stage, they're definitely looking for the team and the quality and experience of the team. Then the next most important thing is product market fit. So whatever the product or service is that this business does, how do we know it's going to be fitting into the market? So you'll set out your problem, you'll set out your solution, and then they want to see an analysis. What's going on in the marketplace? How big potentially is the market? And there's three measures that are often looked at. They're referred to as TAM, SAM, and SOM. TAM is total addressable market. SAM is serviceable addressable market, and SOM is serviceable obtainable market. And so obviously those are getting smaller and smaller. And then really looking at what have you got as evidence that people want this product or service? Have you actually got people who are buying it now? That's the best evidence that you can have. If you haven't got that kind of evidence, have you run focus groups and people have fed back and said they want to do this? Have you developed an online waitlist and you've got 1,500 people who are saying, yes, I'm interested in this product. I want to know more about it when it's launched. What have you got to prove that there is traction in the marketplace? So that when the investor puts their money in for you to take whatever you've got and develop it into a fully scalable solution for the marketplace, even if it's just the first round of that, that there is evidence to support the fact that people are actually going to buy it. You know, if you build it, will they come?
And so fun, obviously, so team, product market fit.
Team,
What,
product
anything
market
else?
fit. I mean, beyond that, they're going to want to see the financials. They're going to want to have, so from a CFO's perspective, they're going to want to have a good set of financial models. Typically, looking out, when I work with clients, we build them a 5-year financial model that includes a P&L, a balance sheet, and a cash flow month by month. We've set it out with assumptions so you can play around and tweak it and make changes that work through easily. But as the conversations continue, they're going to want to get into that level of detail. And again, typically what happens is in the first meeting where you've got that first pitch deck. So here's a quick overview of the business. But in reality, what the investor is looking for is, do I like these people? Can I work with them? And do I understand the business? And for for the founder, equally, it's super important. Do I like these people and can I work with them? And do they bring something other than just money? And those are kind of the key questions from that first meeting. And if the answers to those questions are no, especially the do I like them and can I work with them? If the answers are no, my recommendation is walk away. Do not get involved in a long-term deep relationship with someone where you haven't got that chemistry there, because as soon as some bump in the road happens, and invariably it will, as soon as some bump in the road happens, if there isn't a strong foundation of a relationship, it's going to turn nasty and it's really, really unpleasant.
No, and I was just interested on that because we've talked a lot about like looking at the founders, but what about from a CFO themselves? Because obviously a lot of our listeners are supporting perhaps part of the management
Yep.
team that's being looked at. What is it
Yep.
that those investors are looking in from a CFO?
They're looking at skills, they're looking at qualifications, they're looking at, does this person know what they're talking about? They're looking at, okay, if I'm going to drill into your financial model, does it stack up? They're really, they want to understand that the CFO is a key component of the team, and that the CFO has the ability to manage the numbers and make those changes. So it might be that, okay, so we've run our first set of assumptions. I now want to do some scenario planning. What if your growth rates drop by 25%? What's that going to look like? Vroom, they need the CFO to remodel that. Okay, what if you're going to double your growth rates? Let's see what that looks like. Vroom, you need the CFO to model that. So the CFO plays a really, really important role in that. And it's all around understanding how the financial modeling works and the forecasting. So any CFOs who are listening, if they're involved in this kind of thing, make sure they've got good knowledge of forecasting. And if they don't, um, have a look at some of the stuff that's in our books, reach out to us, and we'll do that. But I'm not trying to sell here. So
And you obviously talked about sort of growth strategy, and I think if you think one of your organizations, from what I understand, is actually helping founders to drive that sort of that fast growth piece. So how do you approach
correct.
growth? What are some of the secret sauce that you've seen work well for organizations to really scale?
Right. Okay. So my other area, and this is where I'll just hold up my other book quickly, Add Then Multiply. So we focus basically. I took what I learned in that 10-year period working for those three companies full time as CFO, and really distilled that down into a methodology and a structure that is more accessible to entrepreneurs, because a lot of people think that a lot of fundraising and M&A type activity is really the reserve of big companies, and it doesn't have to be. And again, you can look at fundraising through crowdfunding or angel investment, venture capital, private equity, whatever. There's all sorts of different things. Even debt funding can be used to drive growth strategies through M&A. So basically, I've distilled it down into a four-step model called FACE, FACE, which stands for fund, acquire, consolidate, and exit. So fund is all about where you get the funding from and how you raise capital in order to drive that strategy. Acquire takes you through how do you go out and actually buy another business? What are the steps that you have to go through? What are the things that you have to watch out for? How do you get involved in negotiating the deal? What are the various steps that you have to take? What are the risk factors that you need to look out for? What are you going to be instructing your people to do in terms of due diligence? All of that stuff, the contract negotiation. Then consolidate is really where, as I like to say, it's kind of where the rubber hits the road. Consolidate is when you're putting two businesses together. And I've done this a lot. I mean, I've completed 28 M&A transactions in my career. I'm working on my 29th and 30th right now. And there are huge issues when you take two businesses and put them together. You've got cultural issues, especially if you've acquired a competitor where for the last 10 or 20 years you've hated each other and you've pitched against each other in the market, and all of a sudden you're in a big happy family. So there's some big cultural issues. But then again, from a CFO's angle, a lot of systems and processes. You've got your sets of systems and processes, they've got theirs. You might not have compatible financial systems or other types of systems. Maybe there's old systems that don't talk to each other. Maybe the company that you're acquiring has better systems than you do, and you might want to look at, okay, which way do we go, and let's bring theirs on. So it's really being open-minded about that. But it's about addressing people issues. It's about addressing cultural issues, systems and processes, control environments. All of those kinds of things as part of the consolidation process are really, really important. And those are the ones where, if you read about in the press about M&A transactions that have gone wrong, it's often during the consolidation phase that they've failed to really bring the two companies together to deliver. And then the final step in the process, E, is exit, which is ultimately when the founder of the business decides, okay, I want to sell, or maybe someone comes along and offers them a crazy sum of money, and they think, well, this doesn't happen every day, and they'll accept it and they'll exit. And then it's talking through, how that works, what that process is, what are the various steps you need to do, and then even looks beyond that. Okay, so you've sold your business. What next? What do you want to do? And I love to encourage people, if they don't want to go back and start another company, I love to encourage people to do things that give back, whether that's becoming an angel investor or philanthropic causes, or at least, building out charitable activities. When I'm talking to people and they say, right, I just want to sell and go and sit on a beach, I kind of go, okay, well, that's a bit selfish.
Yeah.
You could do so much more.
There's no reason nowadays
Exactly.
you can't sit on a beach and be philanthropic, let's be honest.
Exactly. Exactly.
So when you're thinking about each of those stages of developing out that sort of that framework, can you just talk us through sort
Mhm.
of what some of the ways that those stages go wrong? Like, what are some of the key reasons that things fail in each of those stages?
Okay. So, I mean, in the fund stage, it's if you haven't got a good pitch together, if you've got a lack of clarity, if your team isn't aligned, if you can't demonstrate the value of what you're trying to go out and pitch, uh, that can fall over. Again, if you're a woman, it's harder. That's just the reality in the market. And in fact, one of the things, I hate saying this, but the numbers don't lie. So where female founders have never broken through 2%, and the graph over that 15, 16-year period has been flat. For mixed gender teams, it's really taking off. And mixed gender teams are now north of 10% of funding, getting up towards 12 to 15% of funding. And it's on a very clear upward trend. I hate telling female founders to get a male co-founder, but the numbers don't lie. So that's one option for the female founders to look at. But
Have you
but
ever seen someone
but
bring
coming, yeah,
someone in almost like as a show pony, or is it, or if yeah.
I have, and I've heard many stories, and again, they're stories that anger me. That a founder will come in with a male co-founder, and all of a sudden, the venture capitalist just starts talking to the man and ignores the woman.
Wow.
It's I mean it's incredible. It's rude. It's unprofessional. But yeah, I've heard a number of stories from a number of female founders who've gone into those kinds of meetings, and literally they've been blanked, and they've even coached their co-founders, and the co-founders will say, actually, you know Hannah can answer that question better than I can, and try and steer it back. But yeah, it's gender bias is alive and well in the venture capital industry.
Absolutely. So potentially, yeah. So not having mixed teams is interesting, though. Just having that combined approach for
Mm-hmm.
fundraising could really add dividends in
Yeah,
terms of upping your
it
opportunity to get
it
funding.
it it really can. It really can. Yeah. So in the acquisition stage, it's really, really important that you understand what is your strategy. What are you trying to achieve? Are you trying to consolidate a marketplace? In which case, if you've got a very fragmented market, and I don't know, let's take an industry like uh, HVAC, which is heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. And there's loads and loads and loads and loads of small players. So you can go out there and gobble a bunch of them up. And it might be that you say, well, I've got an HVAC business in London, and I'm going to acquire one in Manchester, and I'm going to acquire one in Leeds, and I'm going to acquire one in Glasgow, because they tend to be fairly localized. They'll travel a bit, but they are predominantly local businesses. So you can expand through a geographic expansion within the same industry, buying up competitors. Or you might say, actually, I want to dominate the London market. You'll focus on all of the London businesses and scale up through that. Or you might say, actually, I want to look at going upstream and downstream. So upstream is when you buy a supplier, and all of a sudden you now control that link in the supply chain, and you can also potentially squeeze out competitors. So that's an upstream. And then a downstream would be if you buy someone who is one of your customers, or something something that's going to expand the reach of your marketplace. And it might be that you don't necessarily buy one of your customers, but you buy another business that shares a similar customer base but doesn't have a competing product to you. And so, for instance, you know, you could do a healthcare business, and then they could buy an insurance company that offers healthcare insurance, and all of a sudden you've got access to a huge database of those insurance companies, that you can then offer your product or service to. So those are the areas that you can look at strategically to understand, and the first step is absolutely get your strategy right. Beyond that, then, as I set out in the book, there's a very clear set of steps to go through in terms of reaching out and having the initial contact, meeting them, agreeing heads of terms, carrying out due diligence, negotiating the deal. The key point here is, unless you've done this before, it's really, really important to have someone by your side who has done it, so that they can make sure that you're going through all the steps carefully. It's really important to make sure you've got good lawyers. It's really important to make sure you've got good accountants, external accountants, who can advise you on any tax related matters, and those kinds of things. And those are the people that will carry out your due diligence when you're going through that stage of the acquisition. and then to have your lawyers to support you in the negotiation and drafting of the sale and purchase agreement. So having professional advisors is absolutely critical there. Then moving on to the consolidation, as I said earlier, that's the area where it often goes wrong, and you need to address those people related things. And it's people related and it's systems and process related. If you can manage to get those kinds of things sorted out, you'll be fine. If you don't get those kinds of things sorted out, it can go horribly wrong. And then on the exit, I mean, in a lot of respects, the exit is simply the acquisition phase, but sitting on the other side of the table. So if you've been through acquisitions, you know what the process is. Now you're sitting on the other side of the table. The biggest challenge I find with people going through the exit process is actually the emotional wrench and the emotional roller coaster that they go through. Because, if someone's been building up a business for the last 15 or 20 years, and they've got people who've been with them throughout that journey, those people are like family to them. And they can often feel very emotionally attached to those people or very emotionally attached to the business. And all of a sudden, the thought of losing it or letting go of it is really, really hard for them to come to grips with.
Yeah, perhaps that we need to look at a therapy service for those founders that are going through the other side to ensure that
Absolutely.
they're looking at it the
Absolutely.
right way.
Yeah. Well, it's a coaching kind of thing.
Mm.
There's the mechanical side, but there's a coaching so that they don't need therapy.
Absolutely. And you said that consolidation is often the area where things don't quite go to plan. So what
Yeah.
should you be considering as part of that sort of that secondary stage to ensure that when you get to consolidation that you've set yourself up for success in the first instance?
Have a very clear plan of what the issues are that you're going to need to face and address. So have a
Mhm.
good understanding through your negotiations with the company that you're acquiring. Get to know what their culture is like. How what is their relationship like with their customers, and all of this can come up as part of the due diligence activity. But get to know how they interact with customers compared with how you interact with customers. What's their approach to people? One of the first M&A experiences I had was back in the early 90s. I was working for a big American tech company that got taken over by a big American telco. And the culture of these two organizations was just, I mean, one of them, the one that I was with, the tech company, was very much a command and control type approach. And the telco was very much a we trust everybody, we're all in this together type of thing. And we put the two of them together, and it was mayhem. So you really need to understand the cultures of those of both entities. And I always recommend when you're going through an acquisition, make sure that there are some of the senior people in the company that you're going to acquire that are going to have senior roles in your company, in the combined company, because it's really, really important. If you put two companies together that have, let's say, 250 employees each, or one of them, or maybe yours has 250 and the other company has 150, say, there's going to be a lot of people who are going to feel very nervous. They're not going to be, is my job at risk, et cetera, et cetera. If they see one of their leaders playing a key role in the combined business's management team, obviously they've got to be worthy of it. But if they see one of their key leaders in that role, that provides a lot of reassurance to the employees. Because one of the worst things that could happen is you go along and you buy that business, and then all of the employees leave. So, making sure that there's reassurance, a lot of communication is needed, a lot of communication on a regular basis. And you often have to say the same things over and over again. A very good friend of mine who's a communication specialist, she says you've got to say something 7 times before it starts to come through to people. So you've got to really manage that cycle and that process. Bring your team together, bring people from their senior team together, and plan the consolidation.
And when you think back to like over the years when you've been involved in those kind of mergers and acquisitions, what are some of the success stories that you've seen that, what did they do differently? You've mentioned obviously bringing in senior people, but is
Yeah.
there anything else that they did differently to make sure that that worked well?
My favorite success story, which your CFO listeners will like, was when I was with the AIM-listed Digital Media and Publishing Group, and we had a publishing operation in France, and we acquired another publishing operation that had previously been owned by a major telco in France. And this major telco had put through all sorts of, corporate restructuring charges and corporate allocations and all of this, and racked up huge losses into this company. But because it was a publishing business, they weren't able to utilize publishing losses against telco profits. So we took this company and acquired it, and we paid 500,000 euros for it. They had racked up over 2 million euros of losses in this business. And we were able to structure the acquisition in a way that, in effect, the company that we bought then became the parent company to our other publishing business in France that was very profitable. And we were able to utilize the whole 2 million euros of tax losses against the
Wow.
profits in our business.
Brilliant.
So we we paid 500,000 for it, and we got north of 1 million in tax losses back.
Wow, that's amazing. That
That
is,
was
yeah.
that was a one off. I haven't had any like that, but no, I mean in terms of other success stories, just just like little things where when I was in the auction business, and so we were operating in 16 countries. Our largest global competitor that we bought was operating in 10 countries. There were only three where there was overlap, which was the UK, Germany, and the USA. So we ripped out a ton of costs in those three entities, and that's what justified the deal. But then all of a sudden we found, okay, we're now into new geographic regions. We've got access to whole new sets of suppliers and customers. And if you think about an auction business, you need both sides. You need people who've got the stuff that they want to bring to auction, and you need people who've got the stuff that you're able to sell. And by completing this acquisition, we all of a sudden had a much bigger base that we could apply. So all of the things that company was selling, well, we could now market those to our customer base as well, and have a wider reach, and vice versa. All of the things that we were selling, we could reach into their customers in countries where we didn't previously have a presence. So that was an amazing, opportunity. Sadly, sadly though, there was a sting in the tail of that one. We completed
Mhm.
that acquisition 2 weeks before Lehman Brothers went bust.
Oh, no.
And that was the beginning of the global financial crisis. So yeah,
Wow.
it was an amazing deal at the wrong time.
Yeah. And that's an interesting piece, like how, you talk about the timing was bad, but that's something unfortunately in a lot of ways you don't have control over. So,
There's nothing you can do about it. There is nothing you can do about it. No. And as I said, the whole justification of that deal was the huge cost savings that we were able to
yeah.
deliver, and it was about £5 million of costs that we were able to rip out of the combined entity. But when the crash came, and all of a sudden, we had customers who were getting their bank facilities pulled, so they had won auctions, but then they couldn't buy the kit and all of that. I mean, we had four profit warnings in 6 months,
Wow.
because stuff just wasn't coming through, and that had huge ructions to the business. I mean, the chief executive ended up getting fired. It wasn't his fault, but somebody had to go. But we had to go through and rip out another 6 million of costs in order to keep the
Mm,
business afloat. So
gosh.
it was a very difficult period. And when you've just done a huge global restructuring and ripped a bunch of cost out, to have to go back and do it again, you're really cutting into flesh then. There was no fat left. It was
And
a
I
very
guess
challenging
culturally
time.
as well, you've got a challenge because you've got a second wave coming from a team that perhaps haven't quite regained their resilience as well as you're going through that as well.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes. Yep.
And how did the company find that second round? Did they go on to then build back up and see that scale, or did they not
It
quite
was well.
make
It,
it
it
through?
was it was a brutal time. We successfully ripped out the additional costs. We did a rescue rights issue. We got all of our debt facilities renegotiated. Um, the new chief executive and I did not get on very well, so I left after a year. And about a year later, they got taken over by a big US company that was wider industrial, where this was just a division of what they did. That company is still running today, and one of my very good friends who ran our UK division is now the global head of the auction division within that very large company. So it's still there and carrying on.
Oh wow, amazing. So I've just realized like how long we've been talking, and I want to dig into some of those stories because actually some of those sound really interesting lived experiences. But as always, we need to keep this podcast to a reasonable length. So so when you're sort of giving advice to founders, to the management teams that are going out there and looking to scale a business, what are sort of key things that they need to think about as they're looking to grow the business? What are your top tips?
Have a plan. But then I also love the expression from Mike Tyson: everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. So have a plan, but use it. Have a plan, but use it as a tool, not
Yes.
a constraint. So
Yes.
have a plan where you've thought through the issues, where you've thought through things, where you've come up with scenarios. Know where you want to go directionally, but equally know that there are going to be bumps along the road and there are going to be things that you hadn't thought of. And if you've had a plan, you can successfully get yourself back on track. And it won't be a straight road. It's going to meander all around, just the way life does. But yeah, number one advice on that is have a plan. Make sure you've got a really, really strong team. And I always talk about, within any business, I always like to say every business is unique, but at its fundamental level, every business is the same. They need to find and win customers. That's called sales and marketing. They need to deliver to their customers. That's called operations. And they need to manage the money going in and out, and that's called finance. And anyone who's looking to scale needs strong sales and marketing, strong operations, and strong finance. And if one of those is weak, it's kind of like a three-legged stool and it's going to fall over.
Amazing. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, David. Like, genuinely enjoyed our podcast and talking to you. And I've got a few feeling there's a few more stories that you haven't told that would be also be super interesting. But
I'd be very
for
happy
those
to
that are
come back another time and drill into some of them.
I would love that, and I will take you up on that one, David. But for those who want to learn more
Wonderful.
about you, what you do, but also your books as well,
Yep.
where can they find them? How can they learn more?
Okay, so my books are on Amazon. So the first one is Add Then Multiply, and that's all about the scaling up using the FACE methodology. So that's on Amazon in paperback and Kindle and Audible. And then Funded Female Founders is in paperback and Kindle. It's not on Audible yet because I haven't had the time to go and actually get it recorded, but I must do that at some point. If people want to reach out to me, my LinkedIn is David B. Horne, B as in Bravo. Yeah, just go onto LinkedIn and search David B. Horne. And if they want to connect with me, the easiest way, again, is through my Add Then Multiply company. My email address is dbh@addthenmultiply.com.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, David. A genuine pleasure to interview you today, and yeah, we'll hope to have you back again soon.
I look forward to it. It's been fun.
Brilliant. And for all of our listeners, as usual, if you have found this episode useful, insightful, or however, any feedback that you have for us on this episode, please do leave us a review and reach out to me via the usual channels. Thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time on the CFO 4.0 podcast.